Absolutely. So hi, everybody. I'm Allie. I am the Vice Board Chair for Operation Code and the head of the moderation team here. So hopefully you never have to talk to me about that, but otherwise, there it is. I'm an Air Force spouse. I've been around Operation Code since 2020. I love it here. It got me out of a culinary career and into something really, really rad. I hope that your involvement with our community does amazing things for you. But one of the things that I love about this is how our community works together and teaches other people some really, really cool stuff. So speaking of members of our community teaching us cool stuff, I want to introduce Todd Bauer. He's going to talk about GitHub today and all sorts of fun things about that. And I'm going to be quiet and leave it over to Todd. Take it away.
Thanks, Allie. Hi, so my name is Todd Bauer. What am I? I am a product person, a developer, an entrepreneur. I've been doing this stuff since I was a kid, and I'm getting to 43 at the end of this month. So about 25 years experience, 20 years experience, creating software and making people happy or miserable with that, depending on your perspective. Currently I work at Cognac Government Services at the Department of Labor. It's a great career. So if you're interested in, a career there, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help give you a leg up on that. Outside of that, I have a small development shop that I run. We do custom software for some small businesses, medium-sized enterprises. We just maintain all that. So we do mobile and web apps on top of that for that company. And then the other thing I do is these sessions like this and just kind of talk about the industry and help people get in. It's my way of kind of saying thank you to the folks who gave me a chance back in the day, and I'd like to help out, and especially veterans. As far as service goes, I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, and then got out and went right into tech after that. My wife is also a retired Navy officer, and so long history of supporting veterans in my family. That being said, today I just wanted to talk about GitHub and how you can use GitHub as a career building tool, and using some of the tools that GitHub provides to not only just like promote yourself as a developer, as a designer, but also just to automate some parts of your life that will make being a developer and a designer easier to do. And so a couple of goals for this session are to just talk about the role that GitHub can play in your career growth. And then we're going to talk about like some of the specific tools and content items that you can have for a portfolio website. And then we'll talk about some strategies for that content and branding yourself the way that you want to represent yourself, and then automating some of those things so that you have free time to do other things as well. So if you have questions, just feel free to interrupt. There's a bunch of people in the room, so I'm not going to be looking to see if there's hand raised or anything like that. So just go ahead and shout out if you have a question. You can put it in chat too, and I'm sure Ollie will help me moderate those as well as we go forward. And then also just share your experiences. If something speaks to you in these slides, then just speak up. I'd love to hear that stuff as well. I certainly don't consider myself the end all be all expert in this stuff, and I would love to hear what other people are experiencing too, so I can learn as well. And the last thing is that you don't have to be a developer to do this stuff. Like you can, if you have an interest in coding or you are headed toward that career path, then this is a great session for you to learn these things. Okay, so role of GitHub in your career path. So why would you use GitHub at all, right? So GitHub is a website that takes coding and brings it into sort of a social media perspective of things. So another way to think of it is that like you can create a project on GitHub, and then other developers and other public members can see your project if you choose to share it and contribute to it as well, right? And we can imagine the networking effects that can happen because of that. So they make it really easy for anyone who's just starting out to manage your code properly, set it up so it can be hosted very easily, and then meet people in your industry who are also doing this work that are also interested in it as well. So content, let's talk about content. So I see this so much, especially since I've been working with the OC community, is we have a ton of folks that go into boot camps, or they go and they do, college coursework. And then they hesitate to put that stuff out there as stuff that represents like what they want to become. And the best advice I can give you about that stuff is just put it out there. Like I can promise you, you go look at my GitHub right now, it's full of stuff that I would never ever like say, hey, this has to go into production code, right? Like what you put on GitHub isn't about always putting your best foot forward or showing the best representation of what you have. It's also flipping the mentality around and doing the opposite. Because if you can also show that you understand when you recognize bad coding, even if it's your own bad coding, because we are typically our own worst critics, then you can use that to guide the conversation later. And I'll talk more about that. So just put all the content out there. It doesn't matter, that it's fancy or not fancy or whatever. Some of the coolest things I've seen have been one-liners of code. So, also just any like kind of designs that you've done, I think that's important too. Like it's totally okay to just have a repo that's got, a README and say like, hey, here's a Figma file, go check that out, right? And the important bit about doing all that stuff is that you can demonstrate, like when you come to an interview, for example, that you can follow a design process, right? That if somebody gave you a napkin, you could then, come up with a workflow that would suit producing that. Right. Any questions so far? Any comments? Okay, so let's talk about some APIs. So APIs are application programming interfaces. More common you see on the internet is HTTP APIs. And so GitHub has one of these available to us, as well as like LinkedIn and Twitter. And there's Zapier and IFTT. There's like UiPath if you want to get crazy advanced and do some stuff. But you can have all these APIs automate and power your portfolio site so that they're more engaging, right? Because like it's not easy, when you have a full-time job and kids and all the other things that go along with being an adult, to also then sit down and commit every night to 2 hours of writing on your blog posts, right? It's just not reasonable, right? But what you can do is automate some stuff to like help content come into your site if you want to. And so you can use like your activity that you've done on GitHub, like your normal work throughout the day, to drive content to your blog site. So like throughout the course of a day, for example, you may release a new version of something. You can have a GitHub API on your blog site that pulls that in and announces it. And you can automate that process. You also want to like on your portfolio, demonstrate that you're part of like various organizations in open source software. Like for a long time, I was part of the Bootstrap team. And so I had that on my thing is like, hey, I'm doing Bootstrap, like, ask me anything. And just showing, that you're participating, right? And that you're creating content and that people can see that available on GitHub. Okay, so let's see. The real reason for like GitHub, like think of it like this. Think of GitHub as almost like your like place of like truth, right? So your course of the day as a developer, you're interacting with GitHub, you're pushing code, you're adding features, and this can be for your own portfolio website too, right? But that activity produces statistics and metrics about your capabilities, right? Like what languages you're using, what how frequent like your check-ins are into the repo. This thing called a contribution graph that shows like, if people are forking your code or, you're pulling in other people's code, what all that looks like. But all of that creates metrics that then you can display proudly on your portfolio website and say like, hey, I had a goal of making 10,000 contributions one year. And like, I made a big announcement about that because I was like, hey, I set this goal out for myself for a year and like I achieved that. And now, don't get me wrong, you can totally fake the contributions too. You can go and you can use like Git Farmer, which is a service that you can pay $35 for, and they'll literally create issues and pull requests and stuff and make your little green checkbox green every day for you if you want to, right? Or you could do it organically and feel proud that like you didn't pay for that to do that. So your mileage may vary. But I think if you're getting started and you need a leg up, but you still want to do stuff that's valid, like a mix of the two things is not necessarily bad, right? Like you can use this tool. It's not lying. It's that you get discovery from these things, and like the fact that you take action on them from this tool is what gets you additional points on the little green checkbox. So, but you could fake it with API calls if you wanted to. That would be lying. The point being that like what this does for you in your portfolio is creates a presence, right? And once you have a presence online, people will start reading your content, right? Once they start reading your content, when they think of a problem later in their careers, they go, who'd be good at that? That guy, right? Or that girl. Like that's who I'm going to call. And this creates your opportunities for you. All these are like areas of GitHub that you can go pursue, either as if you're a non-programmer, like there's a ton of projects out there that have zero documentation. And if you send a pull request to the contributor and said, hey, I wrote documentation for your project, they would love it. Like I don't know of any contributor that would turn that down. So there is a non-code approach to GitHub contributions. Another thing, yeah.
Todd, if you don't mind. So besides code and documentation, what else would we put in GitHub? Can we speak about a project that doesn't involve code as an example?
Yeah, like I have stuff up there that's just designs of software that I never built. Like just, I have business ideas that I wanted to create. And so I said like, I just wrote a file and posted that in my Git repository and said like, this was kind of what I'm thinking about building. And sometimes people come along and they go, hey, this is really cool. Like, can I contribute? Or they'll
Understood. Mm-hmm. And does GitHub have a format for things like that, or some sort of a structure?
No, I think it's more like your choice on that. Like they have the tools for you, and then the structure is like what you're going to provide as far as your project is run, right? Understood. So if you're doing kind of discovery work, like I was kind of describing, where I was saying like, hey, I think this is a good idea. Does anybody else out there, does it resonate with them, right?
Okay. All right, appreciate it. That's awesome. Will your slides be available by chance afterwards?
Yeah, I'll post them in the OC channel for everyone to take.
That'd be great, because there's things I want to go back and reference. You did a really good job with these slides, by the way. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, to go back to this, so another thing that's on here is contributor. So that is like if you start your own project, like we were just talking about, the contributor role has a little bit more weight on the green squares of the day on GitHub. And so if you're managing an open source project because you have a simple tool that you wanted to use, like LeftPad or one of those other famous JavaScript packages, it's a great way to like just start off an open source contribution. Yeah. Okay, so LinkedIn integration. So this is the big one. I think that's like everybody loves to do, right? So how do I take the stuff that I put in LinkedIn, like my posts over there, like my whatever data I have over there, how do I get that in my portfolio? And the answer is it's really hard. And LinkedIn does that on purpose because they want you to pay them for the privilege of having access to those services, right? And then once you do get access to those services, you don't get things like your name and your email address and the important things that you would want to use for people to follow up with you when they see how amazing your portfolio site is, right? So the way that works is to use this tool I'm recommending by J.M. Perez, LinkedIn to JSON resume. And what this does is you go, it's described on this link, you go and you can export your data from LinkedIn as JSON and then run it through this tool and will produce a resume to your liking in JSON format. And then the ideal in your portfolio website is that you would just have this JSON file available, and then when you needed to update it, you could just re-export from LinkedIn, repeat this process, and then update your your representation, your JSON representation of your portfolio, of your LinkedIn data, your CV on LinkedIn. But the point being that, like, what's cool about like the fact that you have this in JSON, right? Your LinkedIn data is JSON, is that now you can grab that data, bits of data, and describe or design your CV to work great on the web. And then you could take the same data and then apply it so that when they hit Control P, you can print it out really nicely that way too. Just some shout outs for some supercharged portfolios I found. So there's this guy right here. Let me pull him over. So he has just a bunch of ideals on here. There's just too many to list on here, but just check out, like, if you know Kent Dodds, he's on the React team. Great blog. And just, if you want to copy any of his stuff, he's got his code available on his GitHub as well. Brendan Coyer, his is good. He works on TypeScript. Yeah, just check out this portfolio ideals if you're just looking for inspiration from others. And most of these, I think all of these, from when I checked, like 15 or 20 of them, were available in GitHub. Like, you can review the code too. So yeah, there's that. The next one was just this guy's portfolio. I pulled this one out because I think this is like a really good example of just a simple, clean portfolio site to just like get started, right? Like, all you really need is these kinds of things. And talking to the API usage that I was speaking of before, like, you have really nice GitHub status, right? He's pulling this in over the APIs, shows all of his latest projects, right? With tags for them, how many forks and things. And then some of the latest blog posts too, right? This is all over API. But very simple. Like, other things you might want to add on this, that this gentleman, he just has email here, which is fine, but you can add your CV. He's got LinkedIn links and stuff. So yeah, good example. Also, the avatar, for example, he pulls that in from social media instead of having it in the website code. So if you update your avatar somewhere else, it automatically updates your portfolio website too. So I guess that's a key takeaway, is when you're building your portfolio site, like, don't worry, like, it's fine when you're starting out, like, just grab all the, static content, right? Just because you want to try to figure out, like, is this what I want it to look like, right? The other way to say that is, like, you kind of want to mock it out, right? But then once you get to the point where you're happy with how things are looking, you want to put real data in, then switch over and start, like, recognizing that your source of truth isn't going to be in the code of your portfolio site. It's going to have to come from somewhere else, like LinkedIn or GitHub or some other site, and then integrate that way. So you have less hands-on in having to muck with your portfolio site all the time, right? Okay, so planning and building for your portfolio site, use like very common tools. Okay, my go-to personally is called Nuxt.js, because I prefer Vue. And if you're coming from React and you're more familiar and comfortable with React, there's Next.js, which is very similar. Gatsby is also really popular from the Ruby community, which Gatsby is actually the thing that's powering GitHub pages in the backend, unless they've changed it recently that I'm not aware of. But pick tools that like are going to be well documented and easy to like understand, right? The reason that I tend to pick Nuxt for my sites like this is because it's very easy, like with the content module that's in there, that I can use like GitHub Actions, for example, to go pull content, like say, hey, I want to scrape some content from the web in a GitHub action, and then write that out to my blog as a markdown file. That's a strategy that you can take to like, republish content on your website. With permission, of course. Like, don't just go stealing people's content and call it your own, right? Like, attribute that, all that, do all the proper things to give people credit where credit's due. But Next makes that really easy to like have a content module where like I don't have to like build a blog from scratch. Like, I'm not interested in doing that. I would rather build a tool or go grab a tool that has a blog right in mind for me that I can then easily just worry about the content, right? So I mean, you can do this with WordPress if you want to, if you feel like PHP is the thing you want to be strong on. But the important thing being like pick tools that you're going to enjoy doing this with, because like ultimately the way I've like learned to approach my own site over time is that like it's not the thing that I always like put the most energy into, right? So when I do put energy into it, it's going to always be things like maintaining it, like upgrading any stuff that makes the site work, maybe updating some pages or some design. But like really, like I said, I'm a busy person, right? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on my portfolio. Like, I've already done the architecture spec. I don't want to change it again. So, pick well-formed tools that are like mature to do it. And then just keep in mind too that this work on the portfolio site is also work that you can then like go to an interview and say like, these are examples of like code I've contributed to my portfolio site, right? And help guide your interview along through walking through like, here was the problem I was up against. I needed a portfolio website. This is the solution I came up with and how I organized that code. And most interviewers are really interested in seeing how people think of that stuff. You can go grab templates out there, and like the difference between a template and a theme, generally speaking, is that templates are more built out. So like if you go grab a template package, then it's probably going to have actual full pages built out for you, right? It's going to have about and contact and that stuff, right? Where a theme is not going to have all the pages already like scaffolded out for you with layouts. It's just going to be the colors, the fonts, the boxes, and the ideal of a layout, but not an actual like layout already set up for you to just plug in sentences into. So keep that in mind, like based on your level of comfort with code. Like if you are comfortable, getting into HTML nitty gritty stuff and JavaScript nitty gritty stuff, then go grab a theme and like learn CSS and get strong with it. If that's not something you want to put a lot of energy into, you don't have to do that. You can go just grab a whole template package and then just tweak the colors and variables that are in that and run with that. Just keep in mind though that like when you go do these things, like you are creating a copy of somebody else's work, right? And so like be comfortable with how much uniqueness you want to have in your portfolio site too, right? It's pretty easy for interviewers, especially like I see hundreds of candidates a week sometimes. It's really easy to like recognize like, oh, it's that portfolio from Egghead or whatever, it's that portfolio from Theme Forest, right? So choose wisely, like do a little research and see like what's out there. Like look at the websites that I had suggested before where you see other professionals portfolio sites and see how much of a carbon copy of things that there are out there. Little uniqueness goes a long way. You don't have to do a blog post every day. You don't have to do a blog post whatever, right? Like I maybe write one every like 2 months if I get to that, right? And I definitely like personally want to do more, but I don't really have time. And like rather than beat myself up about that, I just accept that that's how much writing I get to do, and I publish when I do, and um, that seems to be fine, right? Like no one is, I'm sure, out there going, oh, that guy. It's just not happening, right? And so don't the burden of how much is on yourself, right? And whether or not you achieve that goal yourself. People are thankful for when you do produce the content, because it's insightful, it's informative, it's learning, and that's all you can expect and hope for at that point, right? Like put it out there and then let it go, and let it have its own life. Okay, and then I was just talking about branding. So your personal brand in many ways is like your reputation online, right? Like the best thing you can hope for in your career, personally, is that your brand is like very organic, right? Like if you can do these things that I'm suggesting in this class, then like you end up being that person when someone's like, who's really good at this and we could use them on our team because of the content that you produce, right? They'll think of that. So it's difficult to do that, right? It's a lot of work. It's, I know people who spent a year and a half producing content before they got a single hit on, a career path that they were really excited about. It's not that they didn't have work. It's just that where they wanted to go wasn't there yet. And it just took them that amount of content, that much time before the opportunity was finally open, right? So it's difficult, but driving through that time period, you'll find success. I guarantee it. And as far as the way like I've been organizing these portfolios and like guiding folks, like treat LinkedIn as like a source of truth. Like treat GitHub as your source of truth, right? The more that you can just engage with those tools and those platforms for creating content and syndicating it to like other places, like maybe create a LinkedIn post, you want to have a post on Twitter, you want to have a post on your portfolio website, and that's all built right into the little chat box in LinkedIn. And I can show you guys how to set up Twitter if you want, so you can post to both at the same time. You can also use things like, if you want to get like crazy advanced, you can use like Hootsuite or something like MailChimp or whatever, to do all more automation, getting your content out to other platforms as well. But generally though, I find like you can figure out like going from one platform to the other is like posting on LinkedIn and then saying I wanted to go show somewhere else is really just easily done with like GitHub API. Like you can have GitHub Actions, grab your content from LinkedIn, write it out to your content blog if you want to, or just pull it directly from LinkedIn's APIs. Either way. But the point being is that like you're creating this content, you have a source of truth for that content. You centralize your portfolio as the place where like when people think of your brand, they know to go to your website. And even if they go there and then you take them off to LinkedIn or you take them off to Twitter to go read that content, that's totally okay. But just, in the future, as you go forward, like try to keep all your content as much as you can, because like one of the things that like I personally have like struggled with is that like I probably have millions of web pages of like content and stuff out there over the years that like I have no way of like really having eyes over anymore because it's just everywhere. And having all that aggregated back to one place would be like really informative just for my own career development, right? It'd be kind of fun to go back to an article like 20 years ago and see like how excited I was about soap services or something like that, right? Okay, so I've mentioned GitHub Actions a couple of times, and I'll just bring it up here one more time as more focus. So GitHub Actions is essentially like a task runner in the cloud. And so any kind of like automated thing that you can think of that you would need a task runner for, then GitHub Actions is a go-to place for it. Even for stuff that's like on your own like local machine that you want to do, like, mail merging, like say you're running a newsletter, you can use GitHub Actions to do that, for example. Another thing I mentioned, like using GitHub Actions for, is aggregating content. So, you can use tools like the LinkedIn API to pull down your own articles and then produce them on your own portfolio website. Essentially using GitHub Actions to consume content and then store it in your repo for production and release on your own website. Another things you can do with it is, like, if you wanted to use like dynamic content, like I've seen really terrible implementations of people trying to use JSON as a database entirely using GitHub Actions, where someone posts a comment, it goes to GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions writes a JSON file out into the GitHub repo and pushes it. Super slow, terrible implementation, but it was fun to see it all like working, and comments taking like 2 minutes before they showed up on the website. Another thing you can use GitHub Actions for is like syndication. So like if you can have a trigger in GitHub Actions that says, like, when I update my content on the portfolio site, produce a call to Twitter to say like, hey, new content's available, and get people engaged with your website through that. Or another thing you can do is use like Twilio. There's an action for Twilio where you can integrate chat into your website and have it go right to your phone as text messages. If you wanted to, you can have phone calls if you wanted through that API, but you can have like a lot of engagement tools through GitHub Actions if you wanted to. Another approach is to use like Firebase as a tool, or AWS toolkit if you get really, really fancy, but it's outside the scope of this call. All right, so just to kind of summarize everything. So the main important ingredient to making this like successful isn't so much about like having the portfolio site, or it's about having content for GitHub, or at all really. It's really just about creating stuff that is engaging for people to look at, right? And then shouting about it so that people know about it. And then the side effect of that effort and work is that you, as a growing developer, will always have work available to you, because you're engaging folks that ultimately would be your peers. And when they run into these problems, they think of your blog post, they'll think of you, and they'll remember that. They'll think of your contributions. And it's one of the things I love about this industry, honestly, is that like everyone kind of outside of the industry has this idea of this basement dweller programmer, but it's nothing to be further from the truth. Is that this is a very social industry. There's a lot of engagement with folks, and a lot of one-on-one, and working together on building products and programming. And if that's your thing, then this is the job for you. But build that network in your portfolio building experience, and your portfolio website will reflect that over time. Don't worry about not having a lot of content just to start off, right? Just start off. Like, the content will come as you go down this journey, right? Anytime you hear that person in your head saying, oh, I don't think this is possible, or I don't think I can do it, like, just put yourself on a schedule. Like, just do a little bit every day. Like, it's okay if you don't get it out in 3 hours like Kent C. Dodds could, right? You're not Kent C. Dodds. Like, that's okay. Like, figure it out. Like, you got time. Just do it. Last thing is just thank you for listening to this talk. I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions or details you want to hear, just shout it out. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. Semper Fi, by the way.
Semper Fi.
I mean, so like, Todd, since we do have, like, not to put you on the spot or anything, but like, do you feel comfortable rolling out your portfolio site for the class?
We could build one. I wasn't planning on doing live coding, but we could do it.
I mean, we don't have the live code, but like, if you see, if you want to point out anything that like you like, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, so let's see here. Like on GitHub metrics.
I hate it when I screen share and try to type things. I'm never good at it.
Yeah, that's okay. I've gotten used to it. This is it. Metrics API. There you go. This is what I want. Okay, so if you haven't been to the GitHub Docs website, like this is a great website for all things GitHub, right? But the coolest thing is like, for portfolio websites is just showing off some metrics, right? Like how active are you on GitHub? Or just how active are you in the communities that you're involved in too? And how active are those communities, right? These are types of questions you can ask the metrics API and display it on your website. And it's awesome because like they tell you exactly what it's going to look like. There's code samples in JavaScript on like what your code would look like to get it working. So really easy to just kind of build quick, API calls and services for your portfolio using, these snippets here.
Rad.
So if I'm super like not active on GitHub, and maybe I have like a couple different accounts, like maybe even one I don't have access to, could I put myself out there in a way that would hurt me?
Can I put myself out there in the way that could hurt me?
Like in an employer's eyes, like if I'm just like, I never complete anything, like my code's terrible, like pretty much all the above, like bad practices, poor engagement, like I hate LinkedIn, like all kinds of stuff.
Well, you don't, I guess, from the perspective of like this being a class on the socially engaging to like increase your presence, right? That's a hard one to settle on, right? Like if you're saying like, well, I don't want to participate in GitHub or LinkedIn, how do I use GitHub to increase my presence? Is that right?
I mean, I was just saying like, I don't really have much of a presence, so I was just thinking like, why would I want to put myself out there if I don't have very many like completed projects or any, maybe even, or like
Almost all the repos I have in my system are incomplete projects, and because they're never done. It's never done enough, Like I wrote this thing 3 years ago called GQL Builder with this guy in Hungary, and just last week, like I thought it was done. Like I'm like, nothing's changed. Like it's GraphQL is a standard. Like we implemented standard, it's done. Like you can't build anything fancier on this thing, right? And lo and behold, somebody figured out a way to make it fancier, and yeah. And so like they send this request in, they're like, hey, it would be really great if we could do like fragments in this tool like this way instead of the way you guys have it now. And I'm like, that is genius. We should do it that way, right? And so like took me all of like an hour and a half to put together the pull request for it, and bam, we had a new version after like 2 years, right? And so like I said earlier in the class, like it's not about like how much, right? It's just that you're doing it, right? That you're putting yourself out there, that like, hey, I'm a developer, I'm here, I can do this work, and like here's some examples of it. Whether or not like they like it or not is really their problem at that point, frankly. Like I can't, like I literally got a job in the interview talking about how awful some of the things were in my repo, and it was a great time. Like
really?
Yeah, because I was demonstrating like why I didn't like it, right? And like what I would do to improve it. And like that's like largely what we're doing when we're doing this job, is like people are coming out to us as experts, like, hey, like we run this and it takes like 30 seconds. Shouldn't it take like 300 milliseconds? And our job is to go, yes, like we can make that happen, right?
Yeah.
How we do it is the part of discussion, and like that's the job most of the time, is the how are we going to do it. The coding is the last step.
All right, well that's interesting.
So that's why I was like suggesting, like even if you don't code, and you're not doing those types of interviews, that's okay. If you can design, you can describe, you can create images and do those things, put that on GitHub. Like, use GitHub as just a tool for your publishing platform to, shout to the moon, like, you can do this work.
All right.
We've got a incoming from Mr. George.
Well, in that case, like, what if you're, does everything need a README? And how good should that README be? Because like, I have a lot of files as well going through this, that the repos don't have a README, or their README is like really not much at all on there. Just like, hey, this is supposed to do this, but it doesn't really work right.
Right. So what's good about the README? I should have a slide on that. I'm going to go back and add that. So the README is the default page that loads when someone just goes to your repo itself, right? And so that is their first impression of your code. It's not the code, it's that README. And that's why you should have a README, is because just somebody landing on, your repo that's, named whatever, like, that's all they know about it at that point. Like, you land on it and GitHub displays that README, then I can go and engage that first and have a better understanding about what I'm about to go see, right?
Okay, so should go back and add README to everything I can.
The stuff you care about, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a big fan of, like, put energy where energy is due. Like, if you don't get good energy from doing something, don't do it. Like, find somebody else to do it for you, or like, find some other alternative to it, right? Because
Okay.
yeah, like the things that you care about, like showing off. Like, if you look at a repo and you're like, is this something that I would talk about in an interview or whatever, whether you want to bring it up in the interview in a positive or negative light is inconsequential, really. Is just that, like, when you do that, like, show them that README. That way, if they go later, when they're trying to figure out if they hire you or somebody else, they can say, well, at least this guy put a README in his repo, the other guy didn't. Like, that's like,
Yeah.
common thing,
Okay. I guess it doesn't really matter exactly how good it is, as so long as it's there and you can understand it.
Yeah, like, wouldn't it be weird if you bought a Stephen King book and there was no preface or introduction to it at all? It was just like straight on page one, like no publisher or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
That's what a README is.
Okay. My other question is, so you said it doesn't really matter if everything's completed or to your liking, so long as, I guess what I'm trying to ask is really, should I have most of my stuff public instead of just where I can see it and work on it?
That's your choice. It's really your
Okay.
choice. Like, I have stuff that I talk about in interviews because I keep it private and I only show it in interviews. Part and part is because of NDA, part and part because, like, there's stuff in there that, like, I just don't want to share with the public because there's code in there I frequently reuse in other places that, it's just how it is.
Yeah.
The private public thing is, like, really your choice. Like, it's just as well that you could extract something that you do want to demonstrate as, like, competency into its own repo as its own tool, right? And make that public.
Yeah. Okay. I think one more question. So I've seen where people have, like, graphs of their commits and pulls and all that stuff and all kinds of other things just on their main page.
Mhm.
Like, the only thing I've focused on really was change the pinned. When somebody goes to my page, I want it to be, the only things pinned there is something I really would like to talk about or really show off instead. But how much would that help to actually do that with the graphs and other things, just post it onto the front page?
Oh, like using the metrics API on your portfolio website?
Yeah.
I would say pretty big because, like, I find that a lot of folks who are reviewing candidates are going to people's websites first before they go anywhere else, because Like for example, is like I had a candidate who was a really strong developer on paper, and I was like, oh, let's go to his website, and then it was all about microdosing, and I was like, that's not compatible with this role. So, you know, it's worth investigating, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Any other questions?
Anyone? Well, the nice part is, and you know, again, like a huge thank you to Todd for giving us his Friday evening on this, but also just like generally thank you guys for rolling in. It's fun to learn something new, but also I understand that everybody has things going on. I'm Allie on Operation Code. My DMs are open. Todd is also on Operation Code as Todd Bauer. I'm sure that you're okay with people hitting you up, bothering you.
Yep.
Thank you for this and all of the things. And I hope to see you next time.
Thank you. See you around.